Setting fast idle speed isn't difficult, but there seems to be a little bit of confusion on how this works. So let's clear that up today. Before we jump out and work on the truck, let's talk about what fast idle is, and we'll talk about the adjustments really quick. That way, when we get out there, it'll be a little bit easier to understand. It'll go a little bit quicker. So what does the fast idle system do? It's there to provide a little bit more engine RPM to help the engine warm up to operating condition while the engine is at full choke, meaning the carburetor is at full choke. And that's all it is. It's just there designed to warm up or to help the engine warm itself up. It's not an overly complicated system, but it can get a little bit difficult to understand how to activate it, how to get the right setting for the choke, and then how to get the right setting and the right speed for the RPM that you need at full choke. So setting the fast idle is a cold setting, meaning the engine has to be completely cold, completely cooled down. You don't want any heat or any residual heat in the engine at all. So it's always best to set this first time you start it up or earlier in the morning, perhaps when the temperature is a little bit cooler. But also to remember that choke setting is very incumbent on where you live. If you're in a little bit warmer climate like I am here in the Mid-South, it's going to be a little bit different setting RPM wise and choke setting than it would be in Montana in, say, October, where it's fairly cold in the morning and maybe warms up a little bit throughout the day. If you set the fast idle on a warm engine, what you're going to do is you're going to change the way the RPM is at a colder temperature. It may take you a day or two to get the choke setting right, to get the fast idle set right. That's okay, but you still want the engine to be completely cooled down. That's the whole key to it. Now, the other side of that is fast idle isn't needed for an extended period of time. It is literally when the carburetor is at full choke. That's when the fast idle cam on an edelbrock and on a Holly, they look a little bit different, but we'll just talk about the edelbrock today. So now we got a little bit of that out of the way. Let's talk about the individual pieces and components on an electric choke carburetor and on a manual choke carburetor. So electric choke carburetor, manual choke carburetor, set up a little bit different because on the electric choke, you do need to dial in how much of the choke is open. On a manual choke, you take care of that manually. You set that yourself as you operate a cable or however it is that you want to activate that manual choke. Now, a lot of folks will just lock these completely open, put a little bar back there to hold the choke completely open, and that's fine. It all really depends on the climate. But don't discount it just because you live in Texas or Mississippi or Florida that you don't need any choke at all. Yes, those are generally warmer climates, but even in those colder months or those mornings where it's a little cooler than what it is throughout the day, a little bit of choke will help the engine get up to operating temperature a little bit quickly. Now, if you're just one of those people that get in, hit the key and go, well, I guess you'll just have to struggle with it till the engine gets up to operating temperature because it will run a little rich, it will run a little rough until the engine gets up to that temperature where it's most efficient to burn the fuel and air. So that screw right there is to set the fast idle. When the choke is fully engaged and the cam here is all the way engaged and the choke is fully closed, that set screw comes in and out. And what it'll do is it'll either increase or decrease the amount of throttle it gives to regulate how much air is going to go into there. Now, with the choke fully closed, you're still going to have a little bit of wiggle room there as far as how much air is going to be able to get through there, but it's a little bit more of a stressful situation on the carburetor, but you're only going to run at full choke for 10, 20, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, 2 minutes, depending on the temperature of the climate you're at. So that's all that does, is just adding a little bit more throttle to the engine speed to get it to work. Now, when the choke is fully disengaged, once you step off of it, that set screw is not anywhere in contact with that cam, meaning the choke's completely open, you're off fast idle, and now you're working on the idle speed that you set it at when the engine was at normal operating temperature when you set the idle mixture and the idle speed. Now, electric choke's a little bit more complicated because, like I said, obviously you've got to dial in the choke first and get the choke plate where you want to on that setting. But the other thing that kind of throws people off is a lot of times, like on this carburetor, if you are on a manual carburetor, when you go to set the choke, Sometimes it will not fully engage the fast idle cam. You may grab the choke, it may hang up or stick there. If you hit the gas, it will release the cam from that set screw and allow you to go full choke and allow the cam to operate. Also, too, there's this connecting rod here between the choke mechanism and the cam. On the electric choke side, there is a little bit of a measurement that you can take on how much the choke is open and how much the cam is, because you want the cam fully engaged with it with the idle set screw. If you take a look on the side of the cam, you can see that there's some couple different steps here, the way the cam is notched and where it sets. So typically on full choke, you want it all the way completely, the cam fully engaged on this first step level, and then you can go to partial choke, which would open up the choke a little bit more, and it's going to reduce the engine speed as well too. So the electric choke's kind of nice because it kind of automatically sets that based on that bimetal spring in there that does it all for you, at least on the how far the choke is open. But you still need to sometimes before you start the engine, a quick little tap of the throttle will engage the cam completely. So that's really the basics of it. Again, it's not overly complicated. It's not very difficult, but like I say, setting the idle speed is going to take a little bit of time, potentially. So you can do it over a couple of mornings or whatever, but as long as the engine's completely cold when you do it, it's not that big of a deal. Now, if you want more information on how to set up the electric choke, I did a video on that a couple years ago. I'll leave a link to it above so you can kind of follow it. We're not going to cover any of that today. Really, all we're going to just concentrate on when we get out to the engine is just how we're going to set the fast idle cam. And it's not that complicated. But the truck has a manual carburetor on it, so we won't be doing any electric choke adjustments, but we'll certainly do it on the manual choke carburetor. So now that we got kind of all the little details out of the way, we got a little bit more backstory, how it operates, how it works, how to engage it, how the cam works. Let's go out to the engine completely cold, and we'll set the fast idle. A couple things before we get started. During the summertime, I wire the choke open on this truck. Again, I don't typically drive it a lot, so starting in the middle of the day is usually not that bad. So I wire the choke completely open. So we're going to have to remove that. We're coming into the winter months here, and I will hook up a manual lever or cable inside the truck so I can set the choke in the morning when I need it. So I have to remove that because the choke has to be completely closed for the cam to engage itself. So that's the first thing. Second thing, it's much easier to have engine RPM under hood with you here instead of running back and forth to the cab or inside the vehicle to take a look at it. So I always keep my timing light out here. It keeps RPM up so I can take a look at it as we're setting it. So for the most part, we're pretty close. I haven't set this at all. I haven't even checked it. So let me get the rod off there that holds the choke open, and that way we'll have full adjustability of the choke and get started. One more quick little detail is I'm a 700R4 in this truck, still adjusting it, so I haven't made the final adjustments on the cable here, but the bracket to get the geometry right is a little bit in the way of that fast idle screw. So for me to set this, I'm going to go ahead and just take this off, and then I can reset this and put it back on. But honestly, if you had a really narrow screwdriver, you can get to it, but it's just so much easier without it. So just to get the complication out of the way, I'm just going to remove that bracket, set it down, and that way when we set the fast idle, we'll be good to go. Now this carburetor, I haven't touched really that much other than the things we did a few weeks ago with it, so I have not touched the fast idle. Typically Edelbrock will set this, a little bit engaged, but really there's no way to properly set this from the factory. So the best thing to do is what I do is I start with, and I just back that screw completely out, and then that way we start from not being engaged at all, meaning the cam will operate loosely, the idle speed screw will not be on the cam at all. So let's go ahead and back that out, and then we'll go ahead and jump in, get started, and get that up to the RPM. Now I won't be able to talk over the engine a little bit, but I typically like to set this around 13, 14 1,300 RPM, somewhere in there. We're still kind of in the warm part of the year here in the Mid-South, so I'll probably set it closer to 1,300 RPM, and then that way what we'll do is we'll check once we disengage the fast idle and we open the choke all the way. It should go back to that 900, 800, 900 that I had it set at before. So let me back that out, and then we'll jump in, get started, and we'll get that set. And that's essentially it. There's nothing really overcomplicated about setting it, but it's understanding and getting the choke set correctly first, and then making sure that you have the right condition, absolutely cold, and make sure you monitor the RPM under hood. It's the easiest way to do it, and then you can set the idle speed or the fast idle speed for full choke. Now, there are cases where you can't get the choke to stay on for very long. On a manual choke carburetor, it's very easy because you're in control over it. On an electric choke carburetor, sometimes the choke will roll off a little too soon, and that's just basically because a couple of things. You don't want to touch the throttle. If you touch the throttle, it will deactivate the choke and will release the cam off of the fast idle screws. So don't touch it. Leave it alone. Once you set the choke and you fire it up, let it run until you feel that it's got enough temperature in it to where it'll idle and cruise and drive and not give you any issues. So hopefully that clarified some of it. I know it's not a really sexy topic, but certainly setting fast idle on a choke is certainly a big part of carburetor getting it set to the initial setting. So anyway, if you got any questions, don't hesitate, leave them down below. We'll keep working on these, and next videos will be more on the tuning process themselves. So stay tuned. We'll see you guys later.